I worked beneath a cone of warm light, while the rest of the clinic drowsed in shadow. The clock hummed, the vents whispered, and the moon rested like a silver coin on the dark window. On the table, a shepherd lay still, his breath a fragile tide against my palm. "Easy, boy," I murmured, smoothing an ear as if that simple touch could knit the world. Antiseptic drifted with the quiet spice of gauze, and beyond the glass, a pine wind brushed the parking lot. Night had its own heartbeat, slow and steady, and I matched it to keep my hands from shaking. I had called Dr. Reed 3 times already, voicemail each time, like a door closing softly. The dog's pulse fluttered under my fingers, not a warning exactly, more a plea. I checked the bandage, checked the warming blanket, checked my breath, in and out like the sea. I could do gentle things. Gentle things sometimes save lives. The overhead bulb had burned out an hour ago, so the room held to its island of light, everything else a hush of gray. I told myself I liked the quiet, but some silences feel too wide. My cell had died. The landline waited across the room, old and dependable. I wiped my hands, crossed the dials, and dialed by memory. The ring was a low bell in my ear. Once, twice, 3 times. "Hello." The voice was deep, smooth as polished stone, nothing like my mentor's rasp. I froze, then pushed the words out anyway. "This is Riverside Veterinary. Emergency case. I need assistance now." Silence breathed on the line, attentive, alive. "Where are you?" he asked, not unkind, but with a gravity that settled between my ribs. I glanced at the shepherd. His chest lifted, fell, lifted. I thought of the empty street, the flickering security light, the way shadows lean when you're alone. "I dialed the wrong number," I said, steadier than I felt. "I'm sorry." A beat. 2. "You said emergency," the stranger replied softly. "Tell me your location." Something old and quiet in me stirred, like a chord struck somewhere under bone. Not fear. Recognition, faint as the scent of rain before it falls. I gave him the street and the crosswalk, and the little detail about the courthouse clock that never worked. "If this isn't real," I added, "I'll call the police." The line clicked. Only the clinic listened to me now. I hung up and went back to the table, to the warm ear and the dog's slow tide. "Stay with me," I whispered. "Stay." Outside, a leaf skittered across the asphalt. A distant engine rolled through the dark and faded. I adjusted the oxygen, smoothed the blanket, and breathed with the night. There was a steadiness returning to the room, as if the walls had exhaled. When the panic drifted, I noticed it. A thread of pine and cold iron in the air. A clean edge that didn't belong to bleach or soap. The window held moonlight like water. For a moment I thought I saw movement, only the reflection of my own hands. I didn't believe in omens, but I believed in the way animals look at you when something is about to change. The shepherd lifted his gaze and met mine, clearer now, trusting, as if he too had heard the low bell in a distant room. Headlights curved across the blinds. One sweep, then gone. A harmless neighbor, I told myself. Night has many passers-by. The bell above the front door rested still. The lobby was a quiet pool. I checked the chart I'd half filled, wrote his temperature, and let the pen pause at his name line, still empty. Names have a way of holding things together. I would not choose one for him. He would tell me later. My shoulders eased. In the hush, I could hear the soft tick of the oxygen flow and the gentlest thrum of the clinic's old refrigerator. If help was coming, it would come. If not, I had the small, faithful tools of my hands. I pressed 2 fingers to the shepherd's paw, warmth answered, a tiny victory. I told him about the river a block away, how ducks sleep tucked like commas on its shore. I told him about the laundromat downstairs from my apartment, all the machines breathing in chorus on Sunday nights. He blinked, slow and grateful. The wind shifted, that pine note deepened, a forest breath wandering in from the edge of town. I thought of my childhood, walks under fir trees, quiet paths where everything listened back, how sometimes you stop and feel you are not alone, and you don't mind it. A distant engine again, closer now than two, then three, their hum braided into one slow chord. I set a hand to the shepherd's chest and felt the rhythm answer. Headlights returned, softer this time, their glow moving like a tide across the blinds. They stilled, engines quieted one by one, as if the night had placed its finger to their lips. I stood very still and counted my breaths. No fear, just attention. Boot steps in the lobby, precise and unhurried, like a metronome. The bell above the door gave a single, courteous chime. I smoothed the blanket once more and kept my voice low. Easy, I told the shepherd. We are not alone. And that's all right. The clinic seemed to lean forward with me as the footprints approached. And under the clean sense of steel and winter air, something warm and wild threaded through, old as the pines. When the man stepped into the light, the room felt smaller, safer, stranger. He carried the night with him, the way some men carry crowns. His gaze moved to the table, then to me, steady and unafraid. The quiet between us folded, soft as wool. I'm here, he said, and the words settled like a hand at the center of my back. Outside, the wind turned the pines to a hush of prayers. I let out the breath I hadn't noticed I was holding. The shepherd sighed too, as if he had been waiting for this voice all along. Whatever I had dialed, whatever old thread I had tugged in the dark, had led him here, and somewhere beneath skin and silence, a bond I could not name lifted its head and listened. Help me keep him breathing, I said gently. We both moved closer to the small warm life between us, and the night moved with us, slow and kind. No hurry now, only breath, only the moon and the pine, and a promise I could feel, but could not yet see. Good, he murmured, and the room remembered how to rest. The clock hummed, the vents whispered, the world became a soft shoreline again. I kept my palm to the shepherd's chest and let the tide return, safe enough for this moment, quiet enough to dream. I stepped aside and he washed his hands without asking where the soap lived, as if he had belonged to this room in another life. No rush, only the quiet discipline of someone who moves in time with the night. Hold here, he said, and I did, my palm steady over the shepherd's ribs. The dog's breath fluttered against my skin like a moth wanting a window. He opened a compact kit, instruments nested like silver reeds, and chose only what kindness required: a needle, a line, a small hush of air becoming light again. Good, he murmured when the chest eased. It was not magic, only skill and patience. But the room felt larger afterward, as if a tight door had moved on its hinges. We worked together the way two people carry a sleeping child, careful, listening. When his fingers brushed mine to adjust a clamp, a low current traveled my arm, soft as static from wool. I didn't startle. Some part of me had expected the spark the way hands expect warm water. His heart likes your voice, the man said, a faint smile at one corner of his mouth. Keep talking. So I did. I told the shepherd about river stones warm at noon, and the smell of dryer sheets, and ducks that dream with their beaks tucked under wings. The dog's eyes cleared slowly, and his paws uncurled from the invisible edge he'd been gripping. He sank into the blanket with a sigh I felt all the way through my wrist. Stabilized, the man said, not to boast, but to let the night know. I believed him. The room believed him. Perhaps the moon did too. Only then did I look at him fully. Dark hair close to the head, a face carved in patient lines rather than hard ones, eyes the color of distant rain. Thank you, I said, quieter than the vents. He dried his hands and considered me as if the thanks belonged to two people. Caspian, he offered, as if laying a smooth stone in my palm. Sophie, I said, and the names found the same pocket of air between us. He checked the blanket once more, then stepped back and let silence do its work. Two other men waited in the lobby's dimness, still as trees, not threatening, simply part of his weather. How did you get here so fast? I asked, without asking too much. The road knows the way, he said, a line that could have been a joke and wasn't. We cleaned quietly. He coiled the line. I refreshed the IV, our sleeves whispering like leaves. When we reached for the same roll of tape, our fingers met again. The spark returned, lighter this time, like a shared breath in cold air. It wasn't a storm. It was recognition. Animals have it. Forests do. Sometimes people remember how. He wrote instructions in a tidy hand on the chart I had started, adding only what was needed, nothing more. Call your doctor in the morning, he said. He'll be proud of your night. I smiled at the thought of Dr. Reed, with his coffee and gentle scoldings. I'll tell him we borrowed a miracle, I said. Borrowed skill, he corrected softly, and something in me stood a little taller. He set a card on the counter, heavy paper, simple print, no address, just his name and a number, quiet as a secret. If you need anything, he said. It didn't feel like a line. It felt like a promise that already existed and only now had a door. Were you waiting for my call? I asked, half teasing, half true. He considered, then let the smallest nod tilt the light on his cheekbone. Sometimes the night arranges what the day would overthink. I checked the shepherd again. His breath had found a deeper tide, his ears slack with relief. I'll keep him warm, I said. You know how to do that, Caspian replied, and for a moment I wasn't sure he meant only blankets. The lobby clock clicked toward midnight. Beyond the blinds, the pine wind moved like pages turning, steady and unhurried. Caspian's companions shifted their weight, the way wolves do when they mean to be polite, present, but not crowding. I didn't know why that thought fit so precisely, only that it did. Will you be all right? He asked, and the question rested between us, gentle as a hand offered from a boat. I am, I said, then, because truth does better work when given its full measure. I will be. He accepted that, and didn't press, a leader's restraint, or a man who knew that some answers settle best without stirring. At the door, he paused and looked once more at the table, at the shepherd's slow tide, at my palm resting there like another blanket. His gaze warmed, then steadied. Good night, Sophie, he said, as if shaping the night to fit my name. Good night, Caspian, I answered, and the syllables felt like a key turned quietly in a familiar lock. The bell chimed once, courteous as before. Engines did not roar. They hummed, and then were gone, folded neatly back into the dark. When the clinic held only me and the dog and the moon again, the quiet was different, not empty. A quilted kind of hush, stitched with breath and lamplight. I made tea in the little break room, the steam smelling faintly of mint. I sat in the rolling chair beside the table and tucked my feet up like a roosting bird. The shepherd dreamed, paws twitching gently, chasing nothing too fast. I wrote his new numbers on the chart, then wrote one more word on the empty name line, River. It fit him. He had come back to himself like water returning to its bed. Thought of the wrong number that hadn't been wrong at all, of headlights that knew where to stop, of a voice that sounded like a room I'd been missing without knowing. Sleep came the way dawn does in winter, slow, kind, deliberate. I let my head rest against the chair back and listened to the clock's steady hush. Outside, the pines kept their low prayer. Inside, a dog breathed, and I matched him, tide for tide, until the night softened all its edges. Whatever had begun would keep, not rushed, not forced, just held. I closed my eyes and floated on the little sounds that mean safety. The whisper of vents, the faint tick, the warm sigh of a living thing at peace. The moon drifted a step along the glass, and I drifted with it, light as lint on a sleeve. We would call in the morning. We would open the door, and day would do what day does. For now, we rested. For now, the world was small and whole and gently lit. Morning found the clinic smelling like warm metal and chamomile. I woke to the soft click of the thermostat and the steady hush of River's breathing. He lifted his head when I stood, brown eyes clear as honey after rain. I checked his gums, his pulse, the easy rise and fall of his chest. No struggle now, just a calm tide. Good boy, I whispered, and his tail thumped once against the blanket, as if agreeing with the day. Sunlight came thin through the blinds, making stripes across the floor. I swept, wiped, set instruments back in their trays like shells lined on a windowsill. Every small task steadied me, as if order could thread itself through my thoughts, too. Dr. Reed arrived with coffee breath and an apology already forming. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw River sitting upright, alert, a little king on a flannel throne. Well, I'll be, he said, voice dropping into that reverent register people use in empty churches. I told him what I could without making the world tilt. A consultant, a night call answered. Quick hands, good luck. He listened, eyes kind and a little sharp, like someone reading footnotes no one else noticed. You've always had a touch, Sophie, he said, scratching River's ear. Some people have to push the river uphill. You tend to open the gate and let it move. I swallowed my smile and didn't say who had shown me which gate. Afterward, he sent me home for a nap and promised to sit with River. I stepped into a bright, cold morning that smelled like pine and the soft iron of dew. Maple Street was its usual self. Delivery vans, a cyclist, the bakery's first tray of bread cooling the air. Still, something had shifted. I could feel it the way I feel weather changing over the river flats. Not on the skin, exactly, but in the bones of the day, a listening. I climbed to my apartment above the laundromat and stood a moment by the window. From here, the town was a scatter of rooftops and power lines, stitched across sky. My phone, charged now, lay beside the little plant I keep forgetting to water. I picked up Caspian's card and let its weight rest in my palm, not heavy but certain, as if it remembered my hand from last night. I dialed and almost hung up at the first ring. His voice reached me before the second. Steady, low, a calm edge to it, like moonlight on a blade that had decided not to cut. Good morning, Sophie. River's breathing easy, I said. Thank you. You helped him find the way back, he answered. I only moved the branches. Silence eased between us, warm as steam. There may be people curious about last night, he added gently. You'll be safe. My people will mind the edges without touching the center. I imagined a circle of trees around a clearing, not a fence, The image made sense. Do I need to do anything? Live as you do, he said. Lock your door at dusk. Sleep if you can. Sleep, as if I could order it now, like bread from the bakery. Still, I said yes. I napped in the late morning and dreamed of black fur, warming sunlit rocks, of paws stepping carefully through ferns, of a river that knew my name. When I woke, the light had turned to softer, the kind that slides along the floor and strokes the books on your shelf. I returned to the clinic for the afternoon run of appointments, cats in carriers, a rabbit with a kinked ear, a terrier who considered himself a judge of character and found me acceptable. I moved through the hours calmly, surprised by how easy my hands remembered to be. At dusk, a thin fog pooled in the low places, silvering the ditch grass. The town quieted in its ordinary way, neon humming, tires on gravel, someone laughing 2 streets over and then not. I locked the clinic door, turned off the bright lights, and left the lamp above the front desk on, like a lighthouse in a small harbor. I made tea and sat by the window with a blanket around my shoulders. The fog lifted in slow breaths. Somewhere a train pulled against itself and then let go. That was when I heard it. Not a knock, not a voice, just the soft hush of weight settling in gravel. I stood and parted the blind with 2 fingers. 3 shapes waited at the edge of the lot where the sycamores begin. They were large, dark as wet basalt, not crouched, not tense, simply present, like stones that had chosen a shape with breath. Eyes caught the lamplight and returned it in quiet embers. My heartbeat rose, then evened, same as it had when River's chest steadied. The middle wolf lifted its head in acknowledgement, slow and unhurried, as if greeting a tide. Somehow I knew it was him without needing proof. There are knowings that live beneath names. I opened the door only as wide as the chain and stood in the rectangle of soft light. Good evening, I said, because manners cost nothing and give more than they spend. The wolf's ears tipped forward, as if the word itself were a small gift. I didn't reach out. He didn't come near. Between us stayed the polite space good neighbors keep when setting down borrowed tools. The other 2 wolves lay like bookends, facing opposite directions, listening to a world I could only hear the edge of. River stirred from his crate and watched without a sound. His tail made a quiet rhythm against his bedding. Approval, it seemed, or at least a lack of worry. Thank you, I murmured into the evening that had decided to be gentle. A moth wandered through the light and changed its mind. Somewhere, a wind chime spoke 1 note and went back to sleep. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. The night loosened its shoulders. My breath fell into step with the slow pace of 3 patient guardians studying fog. At last, I closed the door softly and slid the chain, not to keep anyone out, but to honor the hour. I brewed another cup of tea. The mint, a small green echo of summer. When I returned to the window, the wolves had shifted positions by a paw's width, nothing more. I sat on the floor with my back to the wall and let my head lean until it found the right angle. No television, no music, only the light ticking of the clock and the low hum of a world that felt, for once, entirely on my side. Sleep came the way it does when a train has already passed and the rails still sing, a soft after-sound in the body. I thought of Caspian's voice saying, "Lock your door, sleep if you can," as if it were the most ordinary blessing. I thought of the river inside a chest, deciding to keep going. Outside, paws shifted gravel. Inside, breath matched breath. The lamp drew moths and little silver dreams. I did not feel hunted. I felt held by wolves at the tree line, by fog, by the simple occupations of night. When my eyes closed, they closed all the way. like a book at the end of a good chapter. The clinic sighed its small, faithful sounds. The world narrowed to safe and warm and here. Whatever waited would wait. Whatever moved would move in its right time. The moon, if it was out at all, kept its own gentle counsel above the sycamores. I slept, and the pack kept watch, and the fog breathed with us in unison. The night worked quietly on every long thread it had begun. Morning would come in kind. The next day unspooled like silk off a spool, slow and even. River greeted me with a sigh, and that careful tail tap he used when words would be too loud for morning. I checked his stitches, his appetite, the way his eyes followed the light across the floor. Everything said stay, mend, breathe. The bell over the clinic door chimed at 10. Caspian stepped in, as if the room had lowered its voice just for him. No convoy, no shadows clinging to his heels. Just a brown paper bag and a thermos that smelled of cardamom and pine. I brought bread, he said, setting the bundle beside the kettle. And the tea you liked. I found 2 mugs, and the quiet between us found the right shape. Outside, the sycamores scattered coins of light over the gravel. Inside, steam curled like small ghosts learning to dance. I saw your sentries last night, I said. They kept to the trees. His mouth flickered into something not quite a smile, more like pride wearing soft shoes. We keep watch without touching the door, he murmured. Edges are sacred. We ate standing by the counter, tearing bread with our fingers. River's head settled on my shoe, content to be the village elder for the morning. Caspian glanced at the bulletin board with its paper moons of appointment cards and a child's crayon drawing of a lopsided cat. You've made a harbor here, he said. It's small, I answered, but the boats that find it come back. He nodded as if harbors were a language he knew well. When the noon hours thinned, Luna arrived with a canvas tote, and that sun-through-leaves smile I'd already come to trust. Herbs, she said, unpacking jars with careful hands, for stitches and steady dreams, and salt for the thresholds. We worked together as if we'd done it a dozen times, wiping surfaces, refreshing water bowls, setting a thin line of salt where floor meets door. Like a stitched hem, Caspian watched without directing. May I show you something? He asked when the last jar clicked shut. He led me to the back lot where a strip of grass ran down to the drainage ditch. The ditch was kind today, holding only sky. Stand here, he said, placing me where sun warmed the toes of my shoes. Close your eyes. Listen beyond the power lines. At first I heard only ordinary things. A bicycle chain, a crow debating with itself, the soft fizz of traffic at the far edge of town. Then another layer rose, quiet as moth wings, the tick of beetles in bark, the breath of soil under clover, a rhythm like paws pacing an invisible circle. The pack, I whispered. And the place, he said. Every ground has a heartbeat. We call it the undercurrent. He stepped back, letting me keep it for myself. We walked the property line in slow measures. Where the fence sagged, he propped it. Where weeds had crept, we let them be if they were gentle. At each corner he taught me a simple thing. The edge saying, not words so much as intention shaped like a cup. Here is safe. Here is seen. Here is allowed. When we returned, a woman waited by the door with a shepherd pup in her arms, and worry pressed into the corners of her mouth. The neighbor's gate, she said, apologetic, and a too-fast truck. The pup's breathing hitched shallow and brave. I laid him on the table and let my hands learn him. Heat, fear, a bruise blooming under fur, no break, no dare, a body asking to be reminded how to remember itself. May I asked the woman, and she nodded, tears already leaving salt at the edges of her lashes. I touched the place that asked first. Not a light, not a show, just warmth, the temperature of river stones after noon. Caspian stayed at the far wall, still as a tree. Luna counted softly, giving the moment somewhere quiet to land. The pup's breath lengthened the way a line of laundry lifts when wind finds it. His paws uncurled, he blinked up at me, surprised to discover ease had returned like a misplaced key. The woman pressed her forehead to his, gratitude moving through the room like a breeze that had finally found an open window. After they left, I washed my hands and watched the water carry worry away in small spirals. My chest felt both hollowed and filled, the way a bell must feel right after the note goes out. Thank you, I said, to the pup, to the day, to whoever had taught my hands to listen. Caspian leaned his shoulder against the door frame, a posture that looked like rest, but was also a promise. You make healing look like remembering, he said quietly. It feels like that, I answered, choosing honesty and finding it gentle. He rolled his sleeve without ceremony, showing a pale seam across the inside of his forearm. Old, straight, the sort of line that remembers winter. From when I was young and uncareful, he said, not explaining more. May I? Sat at the back of my throat, and I let it stay there. Some stories are ready only when the night is. We spent the late afternoon in small work. He fixed the stubborn hinge on the supply closet with the patience of someone who has calmed storms by waiting. I sent appointment reminders, my voice low, my pen making small tides across paper. When the sky leaned toward evening, Luna put on a pot of soup as if it were the most natural thing to do in a clinic. She set 3 bowls on the counter and pretended not to notice when River insisted on being 4th. We ate with the spoons clinking soft as wind chimes, and for a moment it felt like the kind of family that happens when a place chooses the people in it. Dusk gathered like wool. Caspian stood, the air shifting as if the room had adjusted its balance around him. We'll keep the outer ring, he said. If you dream and wake, let the lamp lead you back. I walked them to the door. Luna hugged me with the quiet certainty of someone who knows where all the blankets are kept. Caspian paused on the threshold as if thresholds mattered, and I realized in his world they did. Edges hold, he said, and the way he said it felt like a benediction. Edges hold, I echoed, and the words fit in my mouth like a cup fits a hand. Night settled kindly. I turned off the bright lights and left the little lighthouse lamp to think for both of us. The parking lot took on its soft geometry, gravel, shadow, a small kingdom of moths that had come to read by amber. I made tea, stirred in honey that tasted faintly of wild clover, and sat on the floor with my back to the counter. Through the blind, I could just make out the darker dark where the sycamores begin. Somewhere beyond, paws stitched a careful seam along the edge, saying we'd walked. River sighed and arranged himself so one paw touched my ankle like a promise. The clock made its small, reliable sounds. Between one sip and the next, my breathing found the pack's unhurried tempo. I thought about harbors and hands and the way a place can learn your name, about scars that wait for the right season to loosen, about an undercurrent steady enough to take a person quietly home. When sleep came, it came on soft feet, not a gate slamming, not a wave breaking, just a room agreeing to hold me without asking questions. Outside, the wolves kept their patient orbit. Inside, the kettle clicked cool and the lamp hummed its one warm note. Edges held. Dreams arrived without hurry. The night did what nights do when watched with care. Morning arrived in a hush, as if fog had pressed a finger to the town's lips. I woke before the kettle, listening to the clinic breathe. Pipes settled. River stretched. Somewhere in the trees, a dove practiced the same 3 notes until they sounded like prayer. When I opened the back door, mist lapped at the steps like a quiet tide. The salt line we'd laid last night was mostly intact, a thin white seam holding its stitch. Mostly. Near the far post, something had scuffed a crescent through it. Not clumsy, not weather, a careful toe, drawing the smallest question mark. Luna saw it the moment she arrived with fresh chamomile. "Test," she said, squatting to study the smear. Whoever it was knew exactly how little to move. "The undercurrent?" I asked. "Did it change?" She tipped her head, listening beyond my hearing. Not broken, just noticed. Caspian came late morning. The fog burned thin to gauze. His eyes found the mark before mine found him. "Envoy?" he asked Luna, and she nodded. They didn't make us wait long. 2 figures appeared at the far curb, with the kind of stillness that reads as authority, a man and a woman, both wearing town clothes that didn't quite hide the way their shoulders carried years of running at night. "Beta Rowan," Luna murmured to me, "Ashmill back." The woman's gaze took the clinic in like a ledger. Windows, gutters, trees. "Me?" Her companion nodded once to Caspian, with the caution of someone greeting a river that looks calm from the bank. "Alpha," Rowan said. "We request a parley." "Edges are open for talk," Caspian answered, voice even. "Inside or out?" "Out," she said, looking at the salt line with a scholar's interest. We stood under the sycamores where the gravel turns to grass. A breeze lifted the leaves and set a small ocean moving above our heads. Rowan spoke first, words measured, almost gentle. "Humans in our corridor have seen wolves where there should be none," she said. "Hunters ask questions. Council ears prick up. Then we hear of a clinic where a healer lives, and the Western Alpha keeps watch." Her eyes rested on me without heat. "We respect mending. We fear attention." "I understand," I said, and the way my voice didn't shake felt like a good start. Her companion, Micah, shifted his weight. Not quite comfortable, not quite hostile. "We lost a boy last winter," he said. "A simple fever that turned stubborn. If we had known then what we're told now." His jaw smoothed, letting the rest remain unsaid. Caspian let the silence be a chair everyone could sit in. "No banners," he said at last. "No noise. We are thread, not drum. What do you need to feel safe?" "Proof of your quiet," Rowan replied, "and the healer's choice spoken where witnesses can carry it true." I breathed once, slow and careful, as if the air itself were a contract. "My choice is to stay small," I said, "to mend what comes to my door. First, do no harm to backsore people. You may send observers in rotation. They can stand at dusk and listen to how soft this work is." Rowan studied me long enough to find the places I didn't hide. Micah's gaze flicked to river. The shepherd raised his head at the exact right time. Eyes kind as a porch light. It made something in the beta's shoulders unclench. "We will send Mira," Rowan decided. "She is young, but she listens. 2 nights, then a report." Caspian inclined his head. Agreement weighted but not heavy. Luna traced a fresh line of salt with 2 pinches, and a blessing shaped like breath. Before they left, Rowan turned back once more. "There is talk of a meeting at Stone Ferry," she said. "Council small circle. They will ask whether the Western Alpha makes a spectacle of fate." Caspian's mouth didn't change, but the air gained gravity. "We will attend," he said. "We prefer tables to rumors." They were gone by noon, their steps so light, the gravel barely remembered them. The day picked itself up and continued, as days do. We changed bandages, printed invoices, refilled jars with the clink of glass on wood. yet a tension settled low and steady, not sharp, not noisy, just the knowledge of eyes from farther hills. I kept catching my hand resting over my sternum, as if making sure the anchor was still there. It was. Evening found us on the back steps with mugs that steamed like small bonfires. Caspian watched the first star appear through the thinning leaves. "Do you regret the words you gave today?" he asked. "No," I said, "and let the truth be easy, but I am learning how much a whisper weighs." He exhaled, the sound untying something in him. "My world trained me to answer with force," he said. "You answer with shape." He set his mug aside and held out his hand. "Walk." We followed the edge again, not to inspect, not to guard, just to learn. At the back corner where honeysuckle stitched itself through chain link, he stopped. "Stone fairy will be teeth behind politeness," he said softly. "If you stand there with me, it must be because you choose it with clear eyes." "I don't want a crown," I said. "I want a harbor. If standing beside you lets this place keep its light, I will stand." His hand found mine, palms meeting like two birds deciding at the same moment to land. Warmth braided from skin to skin, simple and steady. No flash, no thunder. "Just a yes," he asked without words. I answered without doubt. The kiss we shared tasted like mint from Luna's garden and the last sweetness of summer apples. It was not an arrival so much as a door opening onto a familiar room we'd only seen in dreams. When our foreheads touched, the world felt comfortably in focus. Crickets filed their soft reports. A car far off changed gears and thought better of hurrying. River, saint that he was, took his guard shift one pace farther and made a point of studying the opposite hedge. We returned inside with the lamps turned low. I locked the front, then the back, then the small cupboard that holds the stubborn latch. The kind of closing that says stay, not keep out. In the quiet that followed, our breathing found the same paragraph. We spoke little. We didn't need to. His thumb traced the pale inside of my wrist, as if memorizing a map he already knew by heart. I pressed my palm over his pulse and felt the answer there. When the room dimmed into amber, everything softened into outlines, buttons, laughter, the gentle stutter of nerves becoming ease. Nothing hurried, nothing forced. Two tides choosing to rise together and meet in the gentlest place. The lamp watched kindly without learning secrets. The night outside kept its slow arithmetic. We let the undercurrent carry us a little way, then let go of thoughts and drifted, held by the edges we'd promised. Later, after the hush settled properly, I heard owls trading notes over the parking lot, a small blessing, a reminder that even in cities, the old songs find their way. I slept with my hand still over his heart, and the clinic dreamed along with us. Dawn folded itself neatly over the roofline, as if someone had smoothed the morning with both hands. I woke to the steady press of Caspian's heartbeat under my palm, and the distant hum of the town warming its engines. When I sat up, River slid his head onto the mattress, eyes soft with the kind of patience that makes you feel already forgiven for whatever today will ask. By the time the kettle murmured, Caspian had checked the perimeter twice, once with his eyes, once with his sensing. "The line held," he said, accepting a mug from me. "Your promise held with it." The word promise lingered in the steam, a quiet ribbon. Mira arrived near 9, punctual as a church bell. She couldn't have been more than 20, with braid and button calm and a way of standing that said she'd taught herself to be smaller in rooms she hadn't earned yet. "I'm here to listen," she said, and meant it. We walked the edges together. I showed her the salt, the iron tacks, the thyme tucked into the fence seams. Inside, Luna had set a little hospitality, bowls, tea, the good honey we save for first visits. And Mira touched nothing until invited. Respect, bright as a badge you can't see. Our morning patients arrived like a weather pattern. Mrs. Hanley's tabby with a thorn under her paw, a postal worker whose finger had found the wrong end of a box cutter, a carrier pigeon that had simply decided it was done with flying for the week and needed a place to remember what rest felt like. I kept my voice low and my hands true. I asked permission before every touch, even from the tabby, who blinked in a yes that made Mira smile. When the thorn slid free and the tiny bleeding sealed itself into nothing, Mira's breath hitched, but she said nothing, just took a note I couldn't read and tucked it into her sleeve. By midday, Rowan's message reached us the old way, hand-delivered by a boy with mud on one knee and pride on the other. Stone Ferry, tomorrow at dusk, small circle, formal hearing, polite teeth. Caspian turned the paper once, twice, as if checking for extra gravity hiding in the fibers. "We'll go," he said simply. Owen appeared like a punctuation, already listing precautions, routes, shadows that looked like allies until they weren't. I let the names and maps pass through me without catching. My work was a different shape. Luna found me refilling jars. "Words," she said, laying out 3 pebbles on the counter like a quiet spell. "Which ones will you carry to the table?" "The smallest true ones," I answered. "Harbor. Quiet. Joyce." She nodded as if I'd picked the right seeds. "Speak in rivers, not rocks," she said. "Let them feel the current and step in by themselves." I practiced the cadence while the kettle breathed, and the second hand circled gently toward green. In the afternoon, a roomer arrived wearing sunglasses. A neighbor had posted about black SUVs and wolves the size of motorcycles, the way fear grows extra adjectives when it walks near a screen. Caspian read it with one eyebrow and a sigh that could have been a laugh if the world were kinder. "Not a fight," I said. "A dial." We put a chalkboard on the sidewalk. Free nail trims and weight checks between 4 and 6. Cider for 2-leggeds, biscuits for 4. We kept the door wide and the talk wider, all of it unremarkable in the nicest way. Mira watched as people trickled in, as River adopted every toddler, as Luna told 2 jokes that made 3 grumpy men become less so. By 5:30, the post had become yesterday's weather. Mira took another note I wasn't meant to read and tucked it away like a pebble found by a river you plan to visit again. Near closing, a little trouble threaded the air. A stray shepherd mix at the alley mouth, standing noble and wrong. No tag, ribs counting themselves. He didn't growl. He simply held every muscle as if it were a door he had to keep shut. I turned sideways. "Softer, hungry or proud?" I asked him. "We can feed both." I set a bowl down and put my palm flat to the earth, not calling, just letting the evening know I had patience. He came like a decision nobody would punish him for. When my fingers found the burrs at his neck, the undercurrent rose. Not power, not show, just the simple old language of mending. Mira wiped her eyes and pretended it was dust. The sun made its clean exit. We swept, stacked, latched the cupboards that need extra encouragement. Caspian checked the line again, then leaned in the doorway as if the threshold and his spine had made a pact. That night, I dreamed in parchment. A Luna I didn't know, years and miles away, stood at a river bend with a bowl of clean water balanced in her palms. Villagers had gathered for anger. She set the bowl on the ground, dipped one finger, and drew a circle around it, not enclosing, but inviting. "Ring of regard," she murmured, her voice carrying across the decades without losing breath. "Step in when you remember you belong." One by one they moved closer, not to be impressed, but to be included. I woke with the taste of cedar on my tongue, and the certainty that tomorrow wanted something small and exact. We prepared without noise. I chose a plain dress that moved like a page turned slowly, a shawl that carried the scent of our hearth. In my pocket I put 3 pebbles, harbor, quiet, choice. In my mind, the ring of regard. Caspian packed nothing that clanked. He set his palm to the clinic door and said what I didn't even know I needed to hear. I don't need a throne in that room, he said. I need your current. We practiced just once, the shape of the statement I would carry. No more than a minute if breath allowed, each line with room for a heartbeat to sit between. Mira listened from the hall, silent as snowfall, and when I finished, she nodded in that small, honest way that feels like being seen. Later, under lamplight softened to amber, we folded maps and tucked chairs and let the building unspool its day. River sprawled across my feet with a sigh that could have been a lullaby. From the street, a late bus whispered past, followed by the light tap of a cyclist's bell. Little proofs that the world still knew how to be ordinary. Caspian drew me close until our foreheads met, and everything else stepped back. Whatever they bring, he said, words warm against my skin. We go as we are. As we are, I echoed, and felt the steadiness land. We lay down before the hour could think about climbing any higher. The window held a slice of moon, like a pearl caught in netting. My hand found his heartbeat again, and the rhythm found me back. I pictured the fairy stones under my feet, the circle of regard traced in my mind's dust. I pictured a room full of voices, and ours moving through them like water around ankles, cooling, clear, unafraid. Breath by breath, the pictures softened until they were just light and hush. When sleep came, it was kind. The house breathed with us, and, somewhere in the trees, an owl stitched one clean line through the dark and tied it off for morning. Dusk folded itself over the river like a shawl, the water taking on that slow pewter glow that makes even worry speak softer. We walked to Stone Ferry without hurry, feet keeping the same steady tempo as our breathing. Mira came beside me, notebook closed, hands empty, as if she had chosen witnessing over proof. Rowan waited near the old bollards, coat unbuttoned, eyes the color of wet bark. A dozen chairs formed a half circle, their metal legs sunk a little into packed sand. No podium, no flags, just a lantern on a crate, and the hush of townspeople who had decided to listen with their whole bodies. Caspian did a quiet count of the edges, then let his gaze rest on me. Rivers, not rocks, he murmured, and the words settled where my breath begins. I touched the 3 pebbles in my pocket and stepped forward. Thank you for meeting us here, I said, voice low enough that the river could carry it without strain. This is a clinic by day and a promise by night. We ask to keep our work open, our door harmless, and our lines of care clear. No cleverness, only the smallest true things. A gull passed like a white stitch across the gray. Someone coughed. Someone else adjusted a scarf. Rowan nodded for questions, and the circle rippled. A woman with flour on her sleeve spoke first. If there's trouble again, do doors close? Only to harm, I said, not to need. An older man asked about patrols. Can you make them quieter? We can soften the edges, Caspian answered. We will not turn them into empty air. Mira lifted her chin, waiting for the current to make space. When power enters a town, it tends to stay, she said gently. What keeps it from hardening into rule? I told her about consent in all things, about choosing every day to be asked and to answer. The first soft twist came then, nothing sharp, just a stone turned by water to show its other side. Rowan drew a folded paper from his pocket and placed it on the crate beside the lantern. "The council drafted terms," he said, "but I think the river wrote another." He held up a bowl, plain as bread, no silver rim, no crest, just good clay, and a hairline crack grown beautiful with use. "An elder in my family called it a witness bowl," he said. "You fill it where you make the promise. You draw a circle you can step into or step out of. If you forget, you come back to the water." The dream rose whole inside me. The Luna at the bend, the finger tracing a ring that didn't fence but invited. I looked at the lantern, the bowl, the river. Everything I needed was already in the room. "May I asked. Rowan handed me the bowl without ceremony, which is the best kind of ceremony. I waded to the edge where the river lapped and filled it, until the weight felt honest in my hands. On the sand I knelt and drew a circle around the lantern, with a fingertip dipped in river. Not a gate, not a wall, just a ring of regard that asked for the quiet courage of stepping. "Enter if you remember you belong," I said, and stepped in first. Caspian followed, boots careful, shoulders eased. Mira hesitated, then smiled at her own hesitation and joined us. Rowan stood at the rim a beat longer, then came across as if crossing a room to embrace an old friend. We spoke our pieces like vows whispered across a table. I pledged open care, gentle nights, and the refusal to use fear as an instrument. Caspian gave his word that dominance would stop at our threshold, that our lines would be patrols of regard, not pressure. Rowan promised plain language, no surprise knives and letters, and a bell for when worry needed a place to sit down. Mira offered to write what she saw without salt added, to measure us by what we did when no one clapped. The river held us steady, the lantern made a small sun, and the world felt briefly as simple as breath. Then the circle asked for witnesses. People stood in ones and twos, as if woken from a nap they hadn't realized they needed. The baker touched the water with flour-dusted fingers and said, "I'll bring soup when storms take the power lines down." A teenager with a skate tucked under his arm mumbled, "I can stack sandbags." A nurse said, "I know the list of elders who won't ask. I'll ask for them." No thunder, no fanfare, only tasks small enough to finish and big enough to matter. When the bowl had gone a full round, something eased in the air like shoulders unknotting. We lifted it together and poured the water back. Promise returned to source so it would not sour in our keeping. Rowan set the empty bowl on the crate and let the lantern make gold of the crack. The second, gentler twist arrived folded inside a low voice at the back. "My father ran with men who hurt your kind," the man said, cap turning in his hands. "He taught me his fear and called it wisdom. I'm bringing it here to stop teaching me." He stepped into the ring, laid the cap on the sand, and stood very still. No one clapped. We simply made space around his choosing and let the river carry the sound away. Caspian inclined his head, and in that small angle there was a whole bridge. By then the moon had climbed to her shoulder height, bright enough to thread silver through the water. Rowan cleared his throat, but only to soften it. "One more thing," he said. "A seal for our agreement, if you'll have it." He produced 3 thin cords. One river blue, one pine dark, one pale as unbleached linen. We braided them slow, 8 hands finding the rhythm. Over, through, rest, over, through, rest. Mira tied the end with a neat knot that looked like it knew how to stay. We looped the braid over the lantern's handle for a count of 4 breaths, let it warm without scorching, then draped it over the crate. "Not every knot is a chain," Luna said from the edge, voice soft as moss. "Some are just memory you can hold." The circle agreed in the way circles do, by standing still long enough for meaning to cool. When it was done, we unmade the ring with the sole of a shoe, sweeping water back to water so no one would trip in the morning. People took their chairs, their questions now folded into plans. The ferry horn sounded once from the far bank, an ordinary note that made the whole evening feel properly real. We walked home as if the path had been ironed. Mira slipped her notebook into her coat and tucked the cord's image into her mind instead. Rowan walked halfway with us and turned back at the mural of the trout, hand raised, coat swinging its quiet metronome. At the clinic door, River greeted us with a yawn that tried to be stern and failed. I hung the braid by the tea shelf, not for show, just where my eye would catch it at the hour when hands forget themselves. Caspian touched it once, his smile small and entire. We banked the lamps until they were only ember and thought. Luna checked the latches with her secret inventory of crows and moons. Owen walked the block, came back with the night folded neatly under his arm, and set it on the counter as if it belonged there. In bed, my body kept the ferry's slow sway. Caspian's hand found the place my breath begins and settled, anchor and invitation. Outside, the river turned pages only water can read. I pictured the bowl, the ring, the braid, not rules, not threats, just a way to remember in the morning what we promised in the kind light of the moon. Sleep reached for us like a shoreline, steady, familiar, patient. The town held, the line held, and my last waking thought was simple and enough. Tomorrow can find us here. Dawn arrived like a quiet apology, pale light sliding down the clinic's jars and settling into every corner that had waited patiently through the night. I brewed tea that tasted of cedar and orange peel, and while the kettle hushed itself to stillness, I traced the braid we'd hung by the shelf. Its 3 threads had warmed as if they'd learned the room. Before the town woke, a soft knock came. Not our bell, not a fist, just the kind of sound made by someone who kept company with carefulness. When I opened, a woman stood on the steps with a battered field satchel and a scarf the color of old map lines. She smelled of road dust and pine sap. Her hair was shot with silver, though her face was younger than that color promised. "I'm Inez," she said, voice low enough to leave the morning intact. "I run the ferry on the East Channel, and sometimes other crossings." Caspian appeared behind me like tide filling a hollow. His posture softened the way it does when a voice recognizes him. "Captain," he murmured, and the respect tucked inside the word undid something small in my chest. "Rowan sent me to you," she continued, glancing toward the river line just visible between buildings. "And someone else sent me too." She held out a strip of cloth tied into a loop. Pine dark, river blue, unbleached linen, the same 3 colors as our braid, a twin made somewhere I had not expected to be mirrored. I let the cloth rest in my hands. It was damp with fog, and it carried wolf scent that wasn't our packs. Earthier, smoke-threaded, with a memory of cold ash. Caspian's eyes narrowed in thought, and then eased, the way a map shifts when you find the landmark you were missing. "North Slope," he said quietly. "Thornvale." Inez's nod was a single ripple. "He asked for barley. No guards, no boasting. A child is ill, and the lines between you have dragged for long enough. There had been trouble once, long before I came, a winter raid that bit the edges of both territories and left a scar that never learned to soften. The story had lived in our halls like a wind that refused to change direction. I looked at the braid on our wall, then at the loop in my hands, and felt the river decide for me. "Let me get the kit," I said. We left as the bakery lights warmed, and the fisherman's radio murmured its first weather. Inez steered the smaller skiff through a veiled channel I had never noticed, reeds touching our palms like benign warnings. Caspian stood at the bow, quiet and steady, his shadow long but not heavy. The river did its early work of carrying secrets gently. North Slope met us with mist rising in blue sheets from the ground. Pines kept their own counsel. A single man waited beside a flat stone table, hands empty, throat bare. The way wolves show they have arrived with peace. He was taller than Caspian by the width of a hand. His hair had gone gray unevenly, like frost along fence wire. His gaze found me first and stayed there, not to judge, only to mark. "Shifter healer," he said with a slight bow. "Thank you for walking into the place my pride had hardened." "I walked in because a fairy woman asked," I answered, and the breath he let out sounded like relief, with its boots off. The child lay in a makeshift shelter, warmed by fresh cast iron and steaming cloth, her chest lifted in little hills that wanted to be mountains, and couldn't quite remember how. A woman with hands like twine-straightened willow sat at her head and spoke to her in a river language I only knew by its music. I washed my hands in a basin where someone had sprinkled cedar leaves. When my palms hovered over the girl's ribs, the old way woke as if it had merely been napping. Sensation like low light, like a gentle tide repositioning a boat until the mooring catches. I asked for breath to make it circle a little wider, and for pain to become something quieter than its name. Caspian crouched opposite me, his eyes on the mother's face, not on the work. When the child's chest began to crest a little higher, he closed his own and counted with her, lending rhythm instead of power. Thorn stood a step away, fists open, as if reminding his body how not to grip a weapon. Minutes lengthened until they thinned, and then the girl sighed, one of those deep, stubborn sighs that children give when their bodies decide to return fully to themselves. Her eyes fluttered and settled. The mother pressed her mouth to the child's hair and did not weep, which somehow told more of her nights than any tears could. "Thank you," Thorn said. It landed like the first kindling's crack in a winter stove. We sat at the flat stone with tin cups of something that tasted of spruce and honey. The pines stood as honest witnesses. Inez leaned against a trunk and watched the sky do that soft trick of brightening without making promises it couldn't keep. "There's another illness," Thorn said after a time, older than her cough. "It lives between us. I named it weather. I called it border. It has always been me." Caspian nodded once. We both let winter wear the blame for a man's choice. They did not unshelter the details. I didn't need them. Some stories can be healed only at their feel, not at their facts. Thorn drew a small bag from his coat and laid out 3 pieces on the stone. A rusted key, a silvered button, a scrap of a map with the river bend inked darker than the rest. Things found after, things kept because guilt likes weight. He pushed them toward us with hands that shook, then stilled. "I've carried them as if penance was useful cargo," he said. "Maybe the river wants them back." We walked to the bank that faced our town's church spire. The water there had a different cadence, as if the current had to think harder around old pilings buried out of sight. I dropped the button in first. Caspian sank the key with a flick that was almost a blessing. Thorn unfolded the map scrap, smoothed it flat on the water, and let the river take its ink back to itself. The pines breathed. The cold air cleaned our lungs without being cruel about it. When we turned to go, Thorn held out his hand, not for clasping, but to offer a simple, spare knot of cord. It matched ours. Of course it did. "We will train our patrols to walk softer," he said. "We will send a runner when hunger grows before pride, and we will answer if your bell calls at storm time." Caspian accepted the knot and offered his own with a palm that showed the old scar across his lifeline. "We will set our lines as guardrails, not fences," he said, "and if our young swagger where they should listen, we will send them across the ferry with bread and shovels." Inez smiled in a way that stitched the scene into memory. "I will charge in stories," she said, wiping her hands on her map-colored scarf, "payable at solstice." On the ride back, gulls wrote brief letters over our heads and filed them in the white space above the channel. I tucked the knot inside my coat where the braid already hung, warm against my sternum. Something inside me that had been waiting without knowing it exhaled. By late afternoon, we were home. Rowan met us under the mural of the trout with a ledger and a grin that looked a little sheepish. "You just made my paperwork a hymn," he said, and for a silly second, I saw the river stamp his forms with a wet leaf. We hung the second knot beside the first. The two looked like kin that had finally found each other at a long table. Luna set a pot of bean stew on low and laid out 4 bowls without counting. We've learned to counter by listening. Mira arrived with wind in her hair and ink on her thumb, and tucked herself into the doorway the way a cat chooses both inside and out. Evening came in with socks on. Patrols checked their routes and sent back only quiet. At the edge of town, a man in a cap, his voice from the ring, left a wooden box on our steps and went away without knocking. Inside lay a broken watch, a tarnished pin, a letter that began, "I taught fear. As thrift, I am learning another arithmetic. We would read it in the morning when words said better." We ate with the window cracked so the river could taste the stew and feel included. Owen told a small joke about sandbags learning to levitate out of boredom, and it was not very funny, but it landed exactly where we needed a landing. After the bowls were stacked, I took the braid and the new knot into my hands and felt the heat of stove, the chill of channel, the pulse of 2 territories, deciding to share a breath. At last, lamps went low and the clinic settled into its winter hum. Caspian stretched like a well-made bridge and lay with one forearm draped across his eyes. Smiling at nothing in particular, I curled toward him, the knots a warm press at my chest, the day spaces gently closing like pages brought together by a patient hand. Outside, the ferry horn gave a single note, a soft punctuation at the end of a paragraph we had finally learned how to write. The river turned once, content, and the town turned with it. Sleep waited just beyond the sill, not urgent, not fleeting, just there. I let it in. Night settled in layers, the way quilts do when someone who loves you knows how to keep your feet warm. The knots on our wall held the last of the lamplight, one darker, one pale, and between them, the air felt braided. We had washed the teacups and banked the stove to an ember. Outside, frost gathered on the rail like a hush. The first sound was small, a single drip somewhere it shouldn't have been. Then another, the clinic's back step gleamed wet where it had been dry moments before. I went to the window and saw the river wearing a new shoulder. Not a roar, a rise, quiet, certain. Rowan jogged in with his hat crooked and a clipboard he hadn't had time to fear. "Gauges are climbing," he whispered, as if loud words might add weight to the water. "Upstream thaw, east tributary let go early." Inez's lantern winked from the ferry slip. 3 slow swings, ferry closed, current swift. On the opposite bank, a second light lifted and answered. Thorn's people, no panic, a conversation in lamps. Caspian was already shrugging into his coat. He kissed the corner of my mouth the way you reassure a wild thing, and a beloved at the same time. "We'll walk the bank," he murmured. "Listen before we tell anyone what to do." We listened. The river told us its plan in careful sentences. I'll test your seams, not to take, but to learn you. I'll push where old stories left silt. I'll ask you to answer together. We answered. Rowan and Mira woke the street in the gentlest ways. Knuckles on doors, names spoken like invitations. Sandbags appeared from sheds as if they had sprouted there overnight. Inez brought coiled line that smelled of tar and salt, and a stack of old fairy planks that had retired with stories still in them. Owen spread a map on the step and weighted its corners with stones, and the stones steamed with their own thin breath. Across the water, North Slope moved in mirror. Wolves and people together, coats turned up, hands bared to naught better. Thorn stood at his bank, like a post set true, and when our eyes met, he touched 2 fingers to his throat, in thanks and in promise. It was enough. We built a low spine along the town's softest edge. No barking of orders, no heroics, just the steady cadence. Fill, pass, place. Fill, pass, place. Mira marked the rate of rise in a notebook that had once held grocery lists and vows. Luna moved slowly along the line with blankets and hot mugs, mothering the whole hillside with the patience of winter. When cold began to find the spaces between people and bones, I walked the line with open palms, not a blaze of power, not the golden flare I once feared would blind more than it healed, a smaller warmth like tamped coals. I set hands on wrists that had stiffened, on shoulders that had gone stone, and taught them to soften without losing strength. I asked the breath to lengthen. I asked fear to become focus. The work obeyed. At the old mill foundation, a scar from a flood 2 generations back, the river pressed a little harder. The mortar there had learned to crumble like bread. We watched the seep grow from thread to ribbon. Inez squinted at the curve and shook her head at the stubborn bend that never did like being told where to go. We can lay more, Rowan said, already reaching for bags. We can also ask, I heard myself answer, before I knew what I meant. Caspian understood first. He unhooked the 2 knots from our wall and tied them together with a 3rd loop I hadn't seen him carry. A slender length of pale rope, braided with 3 strands so fine they looked like frost, drawn by a patient child. He placed the long braid in my hands. Warm, weighted the right way. Where you said this, I'll lend the weight of my voice, he said, and they'll bring theirs from the far bank. We stepped onto the fairy planks we'd pinned above the slick stones. The river lapped our boots with a politeness that made me smile, despite the cold. I could feel Thorn's gaze from the opposite shore, not commanding, not challenging, offering ballast. I sank the braid a hand's depth, just at the place where the current first flared toward the weak seam, not to bind the river, not to insult it, to give it a rounder shoulder, a gentler turn. Caspian's voice found mine without sound, a shared intention shaped like a curve. From across the way, Thorn's presence joined, not a second command, but a 3rd note, the harmony. You don't realize a song is missing until it arrives. The weight of it settled into the water, the way truth settles into a crowded room, slowly, but with a finality no one quite argues against. The push eased, the ribbon became a thread again, then a bead, then nothing more than damp stone that would dry if allowed. We didn't cheer, we breathed. Again, Inez asked softly, eyes on a second shallow kink. We moved along the bank as if we were stitching with river blue thread. 3 placements, 3 quiet corrections. The current gathered itself and learned a new grammar. Behind us, the spine of sand and wood was no longer defense. It was contour, a way of reading together. From time to time, a shape in the dark paused too long, where sabotage would have been easy. Twice I felt the old world lean in. the world that trained hands to cut what others died. The first time, a man in a cap reached for a rope at the ferry's cleat, his jaw set in a private war. I stepped near enough that he could smell cedar on my sleeves. "We're counting on that line," I said, not scolding. He kept his hand there, fingers pale, and I heard his breath stumble. Then he let go like a child letting go of a lie, and moved to the sand pile without looking at me. He stacked carefully, as if precision could be apology. The second time across the channel, a young wolf bristled at Thorn's heel, all lightning and lineage. Thorn didn't snap. He set his palm on the nape, a simple weight, old as packs. After a beat, the young one tucked his energy into work and moved with grace. Even pride can be taught to carry water. An hour before dawn, the river crested. It announced this with a stillness that felt almost theatrical, and then, almost shyly, began to lay down its borrowed inches. We stood easier. Someone laughed and then immediately covered their mouth, as if not to spook the tide. We stayed until lowering turned to certainty. By the time light unfastened itself from the far ridge, our town smelled like wet rope and fresh coffee. The ferry planks went back to their corner, dripping stories. The braid stayed where the water wanted it, invisible, doing its dependable, unglamorous work. On the opposite bank, Thorn lifted his lamp in a slow arc. We answered with ours. No speeches, no handshakes across a dramatic divide, only the quiet exchange of endurance and regard. Back at the clinic, we peeled off damp coats and leaned them over chairs. Luna ladled stew that tasted better than any feast of victory ever threw. Mira set the notebook down and rubbed the page where the rate of rise became the rate of fall, as if smoothing the crease in a complicated day. Owen fell asleep sitting up with a spoon still in his hand, and we let him. Rowan wrote 2 words in the margin of his ledger, held fast, and shut it with ceremony. Caspian washed his hands at the little sink, then looked over his shoulder at me with that softened posture I had come to recognize. The way a bridge relaxes when the flood chooses not to test it further. He didn't have to say anything. I felt the same unspoken thing move through us. Gratitude that tasted like smoke and salt and sleep. Before we doused the lamps, I touched the place on the wall where the braid had hung. The wood there was warm, the way a palm is warm long after a hand has left it. Outside, the river talked in its low winter voice, all gravel and promise. We laid down at last, socks left on, blankets pulled high, the kind of tired that doesn't ache, it absolves. The town settled with us, the ferry sighed, the knots held, the moon went pale with relief. I let the dark come all the way in, no alarms in my bones, no watchfulness clinging to the edges, only breath steady and shared. Pensado para 14's dawn came like a held breath released, thin gold slipping between the shutters and finding the quiet places first. The river had lowered another hand's width, leaving a lace of drift along the bank, as if it had written us a thank you and signed with reeds. The town woke without hurry. Boots thumped in patient rhythm. Doors opened, then paused, then closed softly. The way you leave sleeping rooms. We unmade our spine of sand and wood at the same pace we had built it. Children carried the smallest bags and called them pillows for the river to rest on. Inez stacked the ferry planks back in their corner and laid a palm on the top board like an old friend's shoulder. Across the water, North Slope mirrored us. A woman I didn't know lifted her hand to me and smiled. I answered with my chin, the shy nod of a person who once hid and now is learning how to be seen. Thorn's lamp gave one last slow circle, then winked out in the honest daylight. Inside the clinic, the stove let go of its night ember and caught with new flame. Luna set porridge to simmer and tucked cinnamon under the lid for comfort. Rowan made a list of repairs, and then crossed out half of it, because the morning had already repaired more than lumber would. Caspian leaned his back to the sink and watched steam rise from the kettle. Something in his posture that only I could read loosened by a notch. He reached for the braid hook near the door and tied a fresh, simple length there. Not pale, not dark. Ordinary rope, ordinary promise. We should mark it, Owen said later, unrolling the down map across the worn table. Not a monument, a memory that knows how to behave. Mira drew a curve on the paper where the water had learned a kinder turn. She made it a little thicker than the river itself, not to correct, but to honor. When she lifted the pencil, a faint smudge remained on her thumb. She pressed it to the map's edge like a thumbprint oath. By midday, the air had the clean taste of snow that changed its mind. People went back to their small tasks that keep a place alive, mending, sweeping, cutting, kindling to toothpick size for quick light. You could feel the town settle into itself, the way a knot tests and then decides it is content. I walked the bank alone, palms open at my sides, not to gather power, only to listen for any leftover strain. The new waterline glimmered. The braid we had set was invisible, where it belonged. The river song had returned to its winter key. When I turned back, an elder from North Slope stood where the ferry would dock if the season agreed. Her coat was seal dark, her hair a long gray rope. She raised her voice just enough to reach me without crossing the current. "Your stitch held," she called, with the satisfaction of a woman who has made and mended all her life. "It held because we pulled together," I answered, and felt the truth settle between us like a shared blanket. In the afternoon, we carried chairs to the square, not for a council, not for orders, for stories. People sat in a ring and told what the night had taught them. A boy described the noise wet rope makes when it decides to trust you. Inez told the tale of the ferry plank that had once been a bridge rail, and before that, a barn door, and before that a tree that grew in patient circles beside a younger river. When it was my turn, I spoke softly so no one would have to lean. I said that fear had visited like weather, and we had offered it tea, and it had left when it realized we weren't feeding it sugar. I said I had learned that some knots are better tied with 3 hands and 2 shores. As evening settled, we carried the chairs back inside and saved one for the doorway, the way my mother used to do when she wanted the night to know it was welcome, but not in charge. The wolves ghosted the ridge lines, shapes of strength, edges softened by distance. They didn't sing, they didn't need to. Their silence felt like a hand smoothing a blanket. We planned the simplest of rituals because simple lasts. After supper, we would take our lamps to the bank and set them on the water in little wooden rings, not to send wishes away, but to float them within reach, to remind ourselves how to call them back. Caspian and I walked down last. He carried 2 lamps, and I carried the small basket of rings Inez had made from split willow. The moon was the right size for comfort, more bowl than blade. Thorn and 2 of his stood across from us, lamps in hand, no speeches ready, because none were needed. We lit our wicks, shielded the flames, and lowered them to the current. The river took them as a careful hostess takes goats, with notice and without fuss. The lights moved in a slow, sure drift, some from our side, some from theirs, and between them the dark water hummed, content to be a road. A child on our bank asked if the lamps were messages. "Not messages," Luna said, her voice low and smiling. "Reminders that what we set afloat together returns as warmth in our windows later." We watched until the lamps rounded the new, kinder shoulder and became a line of small moons wandering home. Then we turned back toward our own doors, warmer in our coats than the temperature explained. In our little rooms, Sleep had already arranged itself. The bed held the shape of us from nights before, the pillows with their shallow, familiar hollows. I could feel the town's breath gathering into its long, woolen rhythm. It reached the rafters. It reached the ferry ropes. It reached the far bank and back. A slow exchange, a tide of lungs. Caspian set the last lamp on the sill and cupped it with his hand until the flame steadied. He looked at me not as a king looks at a boundary, but as a man looks at a harbor. The braid near the door touched the wall with a shadow that resembled a smile. "We'll keep it simple," he said, and simple in his mouth was not small. It was strong. It was a road you can walk in the dark by the memory in your feet. I loosened my hair and felt the day unplait. The sounds of the town stacked themselves softly. One door, one kettle, one laugh that forgot it was tired. The river turned a page no one heard, but everyone felt. We lay down, the old quilt smelling of cedar and bread. Our socks stayed on. My palms cooled. His breath found mine and matched it on purpose. Then, without thinking, somewhere a fox stepped across crusted snow and made a note in the margin of winter. I thought of the elder's words, "Your stitch held," and of how the best mending is invisible once it's done. I thought of the lamps rounding the bend and becoming private moons on familiar sills. I thought of the braid by the door, doing nothing dramatic, holding everything it could. Sleep arrived the way river fog does when the sun is kind, soft-footed, certain, asking nothing grand. It tucked itself around our ankles and then our knees, pausing at the places that had worked hardest and easing them with the small, sure hands. It smoothed the map in my chest, made the lines gentle, the borders kind. I curled toward Caspian and felt the hush that belongs to both of us spread to the walls and beyond, to the bank, to the ferry, to the opposite shore where other hands banked other stoves and other hearts found their steady. The last thing I knew was warmth and wood and water that had learned our names.